I'm Jono Buchanan, and in this video we're going to explore quantize strength. Now, as we know, quantize is the process of putting parts that we've played in time, fixing them to a grid so that they perform back in time. And the very nature of sort of multi-track recording within Logic means that sooner or later we tend to need quantize. Whilst we'd all like to be players that never make timing mistakes, of course, inevitably the more parts we add, any sort of discrepancy between the notes that we play is going to become more pronounced from one part to the next. However, it's also true that if we just rigidly put everything on the grid, then all of the nuance in our playing is lost. So what we need is a kind of halfway house between extreme quantize and no quantize, and that's where quantize strength comes into play. What I'm going to do is to put together a little arrangement for 4 percussion instruments, and we're going to see what happens when we move between extreme quantize, no quantize, and then this little halfway house when we start playing with quantize strength. Let's have a look. So what I'm going to do first of all is just to record in some notes. Firstly, for this solo Tycho's patch, this is from Heaviosity's Damage 2. Okay, so we've got a sort of part. Now, it'd be very tempting just immediately to quantize this. And actually, for now, that is what I'm going to do. We're going to listen back. We'll hear the first 4 bars and we'll hear that the timing's not perfect. I'll keep the metronome on for this first playback. And then I'm going to select a quantize value, which I think will put everything in time. And we're going to start there. We'll just put everything in time to start with. So let's get ready. I'm going to turn on the metronome, which I can do by simply pressing K. And then as we play back, I'll select a quantize value. Okay, and immediately it's so seductive because straight away any of those little imperfections, of which there were many in that performance, are lost, they're erased, they're gone. It's almost like I'm a machine. And whilst that's really tempting, it's maybe not the best approach. However, for now, just to give me a foundation for what we're going to go on to do next, I'm going to leave that exactly as it is, fully quantized. So this next collection of sounds I'm going to record a set of what are called typhoons. These are from the Strike Force library. Okay, so again, what I've got here is a performance which is a little bit raggedy here and there and sort of okay in other places. And again, the temptation would, of course, be to just simply select 16th notes and leave them there. And again, for now, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to underpin these performances with some really big tychos. These are from the Action Strikes library. Okay, once again, let's just quantize those fully, and then let's just add one last part. So back to Damage 2 now, and we're going to just put in some really big toms. Okay. Okay, so we've now got 4 separate parts of percussion, all of which are absolutely in time. These last parts are quite big. What I'm going to do is just rein in their velocities a little bit, just bringing those down and making their dynamic range a little bit less so they stick out a little bit less. Let's just have a listen to this with perfect quantize applied to all 4 parts. Okay, now we're so used to hearing music like this, whether it's this kind of slightly trailerized percussion, whether it's EDM, whether it's even pop music, this kind of automatically reaching for sort of complete quantize is just so a part of the process now that it's become automatic. It's sort of something we just reach for from muscle memory alone. And that means that we're missing out because effectively, whilst I want my timing to be better than I played it, and it would be tempting to go back and actually record these parts again now that I've got a kind of rhythmic groove that I'm happy with. It's also true that there is this opportunity for me now to sort of inject part of the musical performance that I made without it having to be either no quantize or extreme quantize. Let's just mute these parts for a second, going back to the first one that I recorded, this solo taiko part. So what you can see is that I've got my 16th note quantize value selected, but what you can also see down here at the bottom is that I've got this little pane here which is called Q strength, quantize strength. And at the moment there's nothing next to that because, and you can see when I hover over it, it says 100%. If there's no value shown there, it means that I'm using maximum quantize. So in other words, every single note moves bang in time. Now, what I'm going to do is to open up this region so we can actually see the notes within it. And in particular, what I'm going to do is to make this all a little bit bigger so we can see the notes as they sit on the grid. And what I'm going to do is to go back to this quantize strength option, click and drag downwards. And you'll begin to see that what happens when I come down to, let's say, 80%, is that my performance is, to an extent, returned to the MIDI that I've recorded. And what I mean by that is that by selecting 80%, every note that I have recorded is now 80% on its way to being perfectly quantized. So in other words, 0% is what I played. 50% means I've moved every single note from where I played it halfway to where a perfectly quantized version of the piece would be. And we've already seen 100%, we know that that's full quantize. So if I back the quantize value down to about 80%, you can see that we're just beginning to introduce some of this kind of timing error, this kind of human feel that was in the performance that I made in the first place. And we're retaining just a little bit more of the character of the piece. Now, you can see when I do that one potential issue is that the first set of notes that I've recorded are now a little bit early, which means that because they're actually before the start of this region, I need to be a little bit careful that they don't get cut or lost altogether. And part of the reason why I tend to start recording things in bar 2 is for this very reason. Rather than just actually having notes right at the beginning of bar 1, the reason I tend to start my pieces in bar 2 is so that I've got the option to have notes that just start a little bit before the grid. And the way that I accommodate those is simply by taking the left-hand edge of this region and just dragging back to create this extra quarter note step so that those notes are now not lost from the regions that we're working on. So how does this part now sound with the metronome on if I solo it or have it play back by itself and with this kind of 80% quantize strength? And you can see that I'm also going to just move this end point out to accommodate this last hit as well. Okay, well that still sounds mostly in time, which you'd expect. Performance wasn't perfect by any means, but it wasn't so dreadful that an 80% quantize makeup sort of strength isn't sort of mostly getting this part in time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to introduce the second part as well. I'm going to, again, select my 16th note, which is there already. We did that before. And then what I'm going to do is to bring the quantize strength down here to maybe a little less, 70% this time. Now, as each of these performances is unique, it's not one part that's been copied to another. Of course, the slight rhythmic imperfections that are in each performance are there naturally. So the great thing about that is that this isn't going to keep all of these notes absolutely rigidly in time with one another, because each of them are based on an individual performance. So it could be that we start hearing a little bit of timing discrepancy now that these two performances have been quantized with slightly different quantized strength values. Okay, so most of that works really well, but I didn't find my groove until a little way into the piece. And you can see that initially this rhythm is a little bit compromised. So of course, manually there are some things that I can fix as well. These notes aren't quite right. They've quantized. My performance was bad enough that they've quantized early. They're heading for the wrong beats. But again, of course, manually I can fix that. I can select these notes, and I can select the other ones that aren't quite right, which are these ones too, and I can move them until they're more like they're sort of in time with the grid positions that I'd like them to be. And what I can also do is to apply quantize within this main piano roll display as well. If I keep these notes selected, then you can see that what I've also got is a quantize option here, where I'm in a position to offset or create a quantized value. So if I wanted just these ones to be 100% quantized, you can see that I've got a separate quantized strength option here. And as I move this slider backwards and forwards, you can see them moving closer and closer to the grid positions. So if there's a particular area where you really want things to be even more in time than the overall setting that you've applied up in the top left-hand corner, you can do that within the piano roll display. So what I'm also going to do here is just select these last two parts, and we will apply the same quantize strength to both of them. I'm going to set this around the sort of 80% mark as well. And again, remember, because they were recorded uniquely, not copied from another part, those little timing discrepancies should be sort of smeared now across all four individual parts. Okay, now what's interesting about that and the way to approach this is that because we sit in front of our computers and we work with virtual instruments, it's really easy to forget that, of course, the dream scenario would be that I could write a piece of music that was played by performers of these actual instruments. And if I was to do that, even if they were the most rehearsed ensembles in the world, there would be some timing discrepancy between the different performers on stage. And of course, that's vital. We aren't metronomes. As human beings, we learn and we work on our groove, but of course, we aren't just absolutely rigidly quantized human beings. So this is a really nice way of being able to reintroduce some of the performance that goes into the rhythms that you play by using quantized strength. And of course, what you could do would be to say, right, I want this one part to be absolutely quantized rigidly, and everything else is going to play off against that one bass. Because we can select a different quantized strength for each part, we can actually create these really musical performances.